Hey, what's going on this week? My good friend, UFC play-by-play commentator Jon Anik joins us. He gives us some tips and advice as to how you can get involved in the broadcast space if you really want to. And really importantly, will Hasbulla fight in the UFC? That and more coming up. Here we are. Well, you've been balancing, I met you back in the beginning of Bellator days when I think it was 2008, and then you were hosting MMA Live on ESPN, and then you went over to the UFC. I think it was 2011, right? So that's been like 10 years. Yep. Between like all the podcasts and having kids and just the exponential growth, how do you find personal time for Jon?
Well, it's like, what do I want to do with my life, right? Like if I won the lottery, would I play golf every day, or would ego keep me around working for the UFC? I'd probably be playing golf every day. So if you're asking me how often I play golf, not as often as I would like, right? But that's what I would probably do with my recreational time, or play hoops or tennis with my twin brother who lives like 3 miles away, which is just the ultimate blessing. But yeah, I mean, I think we're constantly trying to navigate that. And I'm speaking for me and my wife. Like people don't like when I say I've been doing childcare every day for 10 years, but that's sort of the reality of it. Even if I've been away 100 nights a year during that decade, a parent is only as happy as their saddest child. So I think for anybody who has to leave, my respect for the military was already through the roof. And now I just can't even wrap my head around how these families navigate these 6 and 12-month absences. But I'm happy. I'm relatively happy, I think, all things considered.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the pace that you're doing it at too, like I was commentating after Bellator, I went to one championship for a while. And the reason I had to stop doing that was it rapidly became encompassing so much of my time. Cause traveling to Southeast Asia is like 30 hours and then you're there and it's a headache and you're there. And then when you come back, at least for me, I was wrecked for 4 days afterwards. My body was playing catch up. And I was like, man, I felt I was getting sick all the time. And I was just like, I can't keep doing this. So it becomes golden handcuffs, right? Like there's a lot of people that are watching and are like, dude, you've got the best, coolest job ever. But there's the other side of that coin.
There's no doubt, I had my twin brother come with me on a trip recently, and I was happy when the flight got delayed and a short trip ended up taking like 7 or 8 hours so he could sort of have a lens into the not so glamorous parts of our job. But no, I mean, I do think there is definitely a dream job component to what we're doing. I think for a kid like me who grew up in a rabid sports town like Boston, I know the Chicago Bears fan in you is going to come out over the course of the next 40 minutes or so. But for me, I knew I wanted to work in sports since I was 16 years old. So I'm calling live sporting events. And even though it's not the NFL or the NBA, these are some of the biggest sporting events in the world. So I'm very happy to be doing that. But there is so much anxiety when it comes to the preparation, and everything comes at a cost. Me chopping it up with you, delays my prep for this, right? Because I got a show this weekend, so there's a lot of things that are required to do this job to the best of my ability. I'm in a 2-week stretch right now where I have 29 fights, times 2. So I got 58 fighters that I need to learn. So rest assured, if the show got delayed 5 hours, Jay, I could make good use of that time.
So yeah, that's one of the things I always tell people is I was always taken aback by your copious note-taking, man. You were always in Bellator. And especially when we first started doing Bellator, it gets a little easier when you have guys on the UFC roster that have kind of risen to the top. You know them, you get that background. Some of it's just off the top of your head. But when we first did Bellator, we had a lot of not only really difficult to pronounce names, but we had people that were very obscure and hard to find tape on a lot of these guys. Was that challenging to find
doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. And part of the reason I take copious notes is because I don't have a memory like yours, right? I haven't been in there like you. So I got to do everything I can to sort of close the gap on the professional athletes sitting to my right, So for me, that has been the way I've studied it and committed a lot of the information to memory, so that when I'm watching a fight, if every single time a man or woman fights, I'm doing a fresh fighter card, maybe I commit those facts to memory so I don't have to cheat the notes and look down, and I can look at my monitor or look at the octagon when the fight is actually going on. So it's really sort of a crutch in some ways, and it's the result of me not having a great memory. So I appreciate you referencing my copious notes from 2009. I will tell you, as my former broadcast partner, my methodology and my system really hasn't changed since we sat together. I use the exact same size index cards, a lot of blank ones right now for the show coming up, Jay. But yeah, my system really hasn't changed a lot as far as the preparation goes. And I've had a lot of people tell me it's antiquated. I need to get it digitized. I have 6,000 handwritten fighter cards sitting behind me, and I probably need a fireproof safe. That's what I really need.
Yeah, that's like John's nightmare. His house catches on fire. Forget the family photos. It's God,
Right.
just all the notes I have to remake again. That's crazy. Can you scan those notes in, at least have like a digital rendition of them somewhere?
Yes. And basically, I never wanted to like cheat off the old notes. I wanted to do a fresh card for every fight and then look at the old notes before maybe tossing them or repurposing them. But yes, I think the future, honestly, for charity is to package up the cards like after a pay-per-view, sell them for charity and take a picture of those cards. But for me, I don't know, man. I print all my fighter bios before every show. I still have cable television in the house. I don't know, man. I was born in the 1970s. I'm a little bit old school.
That's funny. Yeah, you were 78, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's funny talking about like the UFCs and just like all the notes and stuff. And the thing, like, there's so many freaking fights now and so many fighters. It's back like when the UFC first came out, there was 5-6 a year, the pay-per-views. Now you've got 45 events per year. How many of those are you actually going to and you're away from the house for?
The most I've done in a year is 25. So I think it'll be right around that number this year. And it's insane, right? Like, I'm always trying to think about, well, the NFL guys go 17 straight Sundays. What are you complaining about? I just think our shows are such monstrosities when you're talking about 8 hours on a headset, 15 fights. It's the devil I know. And it used to be 10 or 11 fights, and then it was 12, and then they bled it to 13. And I'm thinking, how many fights can they actually put on an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper, So when I see 30 fighters, like, that's the anxiety of this job for me, because, right, there's always another interview you could ingest. There's always another piece of film you could watch. But it's the devil I know. And 20 a year is probably about a good number for me.
Most of those domestic, or does that also bring you overseas for some of those? I know you've been in Dubai and Abu Dhabi.
Right. So COVID-19 has sort of been interesting, right? There's been some give and take. It's been a lot of Abu Dhabi. I think I've been 5 or 6 times, but there have been a lot of domestic shows, right? Not a lot of Australia and New Zealand, which I think helps the family life and helps the work-life balance a little bit. But yeah, man, I've done 27 shows in Brazil. Part of the reason I moved from Vegas to Florida was because 6 of my shows every year were in Brazil, and it looked like they were going to be there for the near future. That has obviously changed. I look forward to flying internationally and getting back out there. Been a lot of Vegas, obviously, for a guy based in South Florida. So a lot of cross-country domestics, but yeah, I don't know. I guess, yeah, that is part of it with the guys in the NFL. They do 17 straight weeks, but it's 3 hours a week. And obviously it's it's all in the US for the most part.
Yeah. And that's what people don't realize too, is like, it's not a fair comparison to compare. And I haven't commentated for anything besides MMA. So I guess I'm not the most articulate, but you probably know better than I would. It's not fair to compare NFL to MMA, because the NFL guys, for the most part, are the same every week. The stats, the things, the teams you're covering, they kind of vacillate a little bit. But with MMA, not only do you have all this back work you have to do to find who's the new guy on the card, but people don't realize, like you said, for that football game, you're watching 3 hours, they're there for 4 hours, maybe a little 30-minute hour post. But like when we're commentating, or you're commentating, that's like a 10-hour day. By the time you leave your hotel till you get there, till you do the pre-shows, it's a long day. People tune into the pay-per-view and they just see you there for 3 hours. In the back of their head, they're thinking you're just there for 3 hours for the highlight. But you had to sit there when there was nobody in the arena for the first 18 of the 20 fights.
Right. I remember when I was a boxing journalist, a radio guy, I was like the only guy who showed up for the boxing prelims. I was like, oh, is this not what the media does? You don't show up for the first few fights of the night. But yeah, man, it's a huge undertaking. And my Fridays are like 18-hour days because there's a lot of prep. Sometimes I'm doing 2 weigh-ins, a weigh-in in the morning. There are television obligations intermingled within there, and then a ceremonial weigh-in if your guy Joe Rogan isn't there in the afternoon. So yeah, those Fridays are a beast, and Saturday is a beast as well. And to your point, like Claudio Puelles is fighting this weekend. He was the second youngest fighter on the roster when he made his UFC debut in 2015. Or 16, I think it was. I haven't called a fight of his since 2016. And because I don't have the steel trap memory like maybe you do, when I'm prepping Claudio Puelles, which I did today before we started, I can't remember seeing the guy fight in my life.
Is that the Chris Grutzmacher fight?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah,
so yeah, so that just gives you a lens into it makes your point that you're making. It's just poor. Yes, I didn't see his fight against Jordan Levitt in August, because I have 3 kids and was doing something on fight day. And yeah, so I'm diving into him for the first time since 2016 today.
were you always a big sports bettor?
Yes, I mean, I remember placing my first bet on sports in like 1994 when I was in high school, and then I remember going online in like 1996 and placing my first like 3-team Major League Baseball parlay for $10. So I'm contractually prevented from betting on combat sports, boxing, and MMA. I should be able to bet on boxing though, Jay.
Yeah.
But no, I don't bet on MMA, but I will literally bet on anything else. My biggest loss ever was Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump in the presidential election in 2016.
Yeah, I wonder if you could have got that back if they retabulated the votes in like a legitimate way. Like, can we get a second? Yeah, can we get that was a bad referee's decision, I think, on that one. But so yeah, I remember back in the Bellator days, you were always like constantly like making bets and wagers, and so obviously you can't do that because of the UFC and stuff now. But what do you think about all these fights, like the Thrillers and the Jake Pauls and all these guys like possibly fighting Mike Tyson and Mayweather coming out and going the distance with one of the Logans, the Paul brothers?
I think they're going to call your number. I think they're going to call your number soon. That's what I think. I think you better be ready, right? Stay ready, Jay, so you don't have to get ready. You never know when they're going to call your number. But no, I mean, I think it's, I'm all for money-making opportunities. Platinum Mike Perry is a friend. So if he's making $250,000 to show, power to him,
Right.
and he certainly has some hands, So I'm all for guys making money. I think largely there's another conversation to be had. It's, I guess, a little bit disappointing that a 5-time UFC welterweight champion, Tyron Woodley, would lose in a combat sports setting to Jake Paul. But again, I think there's a lot of strategy involved when it comes to these opponents. The Ben Askren fight was just ludicrous, right? I love Ben Askren, one of my favorite human beings out there in the MMA space, but let us not pretend that he's not one of the worst 20 or 25 strikers in UFC history, right? Sure. And that's probably 10,000 athletes we're talking about, So I'm all for the UFC guys making money after their UFC days, but hopefully we can get to a place where 15, 20 years from now, the number 15 UFC lightweight in the world is making $1 million a fight, because that's what I think professional athletes on that level would deserve.
Yeah, and we'll get back to that in a second, but to talk about the Tyrone Woodley bout for a second. See, I watched that, and like most people I was sorely disappointed that Tyrone wasn't really putting his hands on was it Logan or Jake? I get those guys confused all the time. One of Jake Paul. I got Jake Paul. But there was that one point where he looked like he had him against the ropes, and everyone was like, why didn't you get in there and have that killer instinct to finish him? And I was reading on some forums, and I don't know if there's any shred of truth to this, but when I thought about it in hindsight, it does make sense that there may have been a no knockout clause. Have you heard anything about that?
Oh, Jay, I mean, could you imagine? I
could not. Though, no, but I could.
I don't know, man.
I mean, wouldn't that make sense if you were which Logan or Jake? I'm going to write this down so I don't forget.
No, it's not the wildest conspiracy theory that I've ever heard, of course, but let us hope not.
Yeah.
In 2021, right? Part of the reason why Floyd Mayweather against Logan Paul didn't pique my interest at all. Like, I was excited for Tyron Woodley against Jake Paul. I wanted to see it, and not for nothing. Like, I know Jake Paul's working hard and putting in the time and does have legitimate professional boxing aspirations. And I support Jake Paul largely. But Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather is an exhibition, right? There's a betting line. What does that even mean? It's an exhibition and they're not judging it yet. We're going to bet on an outcome here, at least with Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley. And maybe you're curbing my enthusiasm a little bit, suggesting there was a no knockout clause in there. But at least for that fight, it was a professional boxing endeavor that shows up on both guys' records.
Yeah, I think that you can look at that from two different ways, right? Like, people go, well, this guy didn't deserve to make the money. But I think, like, one of the things I love about America is that we are just capitalist pigs. And if you have the ambition, if you have the ambition to get out of bed in the morning and you have the ability and you can hustle, God bless hustlers. You can't not respect a guy like Jake Paul and Logan Paul. Like, put aside how you feel about them personally or what their antics, but they were able to go out there and they're still stepping into the ring and they're still talking themselves into these huge paydays and they're getting millions of people to watch. That's something that the UFC had issues doing for many, many, many years. I mean, like, the pay-per-view numbers in the first 30 UFCs were, really small.
Right. And you're right. They're putting in the time to set up these opportunities, right? Especially Jake, right? Like I really am getting good information that he is putting in the time and putting in the right work and is desirous of boxing success that maybe extends beyond what a lot of people think is just a circus. So yeah, man, you know, I mean, are there fighters on a UFC or PFL roster that aren't working as hard as Jake Paul? You're goddamn right, you know, and I say that with all due respect. So I'm all for hard workers. I'm all for hustlers. And I do think it's sometimes hard for people to wrap their heads around the fact that, you know, they can do suggested numbers that maybe some truly elite mixed martial artists can't, and you start to wonder why. But it kind of is what it is. It's generational. And you know, when I go to my daughter's elementary school, I hear the kids on the playground dropping the name Jake Paul, and it used to blow my mind. It doesn't anymore.
You know, yeah, for sure. It's crazy. When you look at some of the Dana has, and I don't know to what level, if at all, he's handcuffed now with the corporate structure that's kind of been overlaid the UFC over the last few years. But Dana brought in Brock Lesnar, who arguably wasn't ready for an MMA fight. But hey, look, similar demographic. Everybody likes watching him fight. Do you think there's ever going to be a possibility that we'll see one of the Logan brothers in the UFC?
Well, obviously, Dana has been dismissive of that noise, at least to this point in time. And I think there's been a little bit of a back and forth that doesn't set a great foundation for a business relationship. But I also don't know that they have any great MMA aspirations, you know, and until that happens, you know, I just don't really see them crossing into the UFC. You know, I also think for the UFC, they just don't need those guys, right? It's so interesting for us as commentators, right? We're charged with humanizing these guys and building up these fighters and helping the promotion to build stars. And, you know, people worry, oh, you know, when John Jones goes away for a little bit, when's the next star going to emerge? And then, you know what? Here comes Israel Adesanya, right? And then, oh, well, who's going to be the next star? Well, you know, how's Patty Pimblett doing getting a 7-figure deal from Barstool Sports? So for me, with respect, I know the promotion cuts my check, and this might sound like promotional hyperbole in some way, shape, or form, but I just don't see us, if I can say us, you know, needing those guys at all to do numbers and to continue to be the combat sports leader that we are.
Looking back at some of the earlier UFCs, there was a time when you had the promotional time leading up to these events. And again, the UFC is a machine now, but when you have 90 days leading up to like a pay-per-view, like who didn't watch Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture? Like everybody that was a fan watched that. Nowadays, there's so many events, and people ask me, and I'm probably even going to put my foot in my mouth here a little bit, but people ask me like, oh, did you watch the UFC this weekend? I'm like, I have probably watched 5 UFCs in 5 years. And it's like the big fights, just there's so many of them. And you talked about stars, and it's like, you got a guy like Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's 29-0, walks away from the UFC, which I want to talk about that again. But like, do you think that doing this many events has on some level handcuffed the UFC from bringing up these big stars? Do you think it's just a bigger platform?
Yes, no, there's no doubt about it, right? I mean, Bill Belichick famously said, we're on to Cincinnati when being dismissive of a reporter. And I can't tell you, Jay, how many times I've trotted out that line, right? UFC 267, the UFC 268 just went down on back-to-back weekends. Now, that's a rare occurrence where you'd have numbered events back to back. And for me, it was obviously a huge undertaking in terms of the prep, but like Glover Teixeira's win got buried by UFC 268, right? Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler, look what they did a week later. Yeah. So you hit on an inconvenient truth and something that is wise of you to hit on. I don't know what the answers are, but I do know that even when we have a week off after a pay-per-view, one singular week off, if you've won a title, you get so much more shine than you do if even there's a UFC fight night the next weekend. So I don't know the best way to sort of satisfy all the masters, you know? I mean, there's television contracts and fighter contracts that are guaranteeing guys 3 fights a year that they have to be paid for. And there are a lot of different chefs and mouths to feed. But yes, I think in a perfect world, the wheelhouse is 25 to 30 events, with 30 being the absolute max, to do what you say, you know, to give the events time to breathe and to give the big wins, the championship wins, sort of the opportunity to resonate with fans who aren't just, you know, looking at the next week's card on Sunday morning.
Do you think that there'll be a time where the UFC scales back some of the events?
Well, I mean, my prayers are going unanswered, Jay. You know, I mean, I don't get paid per show right now.
Oh, no.
You know,
oh,
it's
no.
insane. right? I'm coming up on a pretty big break though. After I do December 4th and December 11th, my number won't be called again until January 22nd. But yeah, man, I mean, we don't have an off season. And when we have like 3 weeks off, I find myself looking forward to not getting back on the road, but getting back, with a headset on. So I think 30 is the right number. And when I continue to pray for my children and their health and well-being, I will continue to pray for not just 25 or 30 events a year, but for me, can we do 11 or 12 fights a night, Jason Chambers? Like
just instead of this
16, 15 fights.
Oh
please?
Gosh, it's so crazy. And I know that you're the type of guy that doesn't go, I got 8 hours today, I'm going to just put it on 12 or 16. You'll work the extra 8 for all those. So I know that I have vivid memories of you just like missing dinners when we were at Bellator because you're just making notes and you go in your hotel room and there's 300 freaking notepads. And it looked like if you didn't know, you'd think Jon Anik was an FBI file investigator. He read string tying this guy to that guy and he lived next to his uncle and he beat him. But that's why, I think you're one of the most successful, if not the most successful commentator in sports, man. You're a workhorse. And, looking at guys like Khabib Nurmagomedov, 29-0, leave the UFC. Do you think there's going to be a time where he comes back? Because that's something we have seen. How many guys have retired and then they come back?
Right. I said when he retired that it felt pretty final, obviously having been in the octagon with him after the fact. But I said, if he is going to come back, it's certainly not going to be inside of 12 or 18 or even 24 months. I think you need to let this thing breathe. He's still a young man. He's still in the gym. And certainly if he gave himself the right amount of time, could probably come back and beat any man 165 pounds or less in the world. And maybe that's not giving him enough credit. So yeah, I mean, I always thought 36, 48 months, maybe he would start to get the itch. It does seem as though he has been able to scratch the competitive itch by cornering fighters, coaching fighters. He's got his Eagles MMA promotion. So I think he's doing everything in his power to respond to his mother's wishes and, direct his focus and channel his energy in other productive ways. But obviously, as you can attest, there's nothing like making that walk.
I was just watching one of the Dana's feed, and I think it was even on yours too. You had a Hasbulla was there in the front row. And if you ever watched Instagram, you see these guys. I forget who's his nemesis, Hasbulla, and I don't know the other guy's name off the top of my head.
I don't know. I need my notes. See,
he's gonna dig in through the notes there. Do you think that's is there any possibility? Because gosh, I would love to watch that MMA fight between 17-year-old little people. That would be freaking amazing. Right. Like the guilty pleasure of that.
So that Dana White, right? Like he likes a meritocracy. Like he really does, even though sometimes there are these outliers and Jose Aldo will get a title shot off a loss. Like for the most part, Dana White does want to give the most deserving guy the title shot. And he wants to stay away from novelty fights. James Toney, Randy Couture was one that comes to mind. But this feels like a special enough circumstance where maybe even under the UFC banner, these two could actually compete. I don't know if I'm just a little bit, stoned residually from this morning or what, but I think that there's an appetite for it. And I think maybe the UFC would be the banner under which it gets done. I think that is more likely than a super heavyweight division or super heavyweight fight between giants in the UFC. I think it'll be the little people. And, I don't know. My money might be on the other guy and not Hasbulla, actually.
Really? Because is he actually getting some time? I know he's friends with Khabib Nurmagomedov, but I wonder if he's actually getting any real training in there. Really?
He trains. Yeah, he trains. He has trained there for a long time, supposedly. So, and my money's still on the other guy because I think size matters. He looks bigger.
Especially when it's such a large part of your body weight when you're that small.
And now I'm probably going to get smacked by Hasbulla when I see him again. He didn't really like taking a picture with me. Full disclosure,
Why is that?
I don't think he knows who the fuck I am, Jay. So, who is this guy all dressed up coming over here? And as I posted on Instagram, I have literally gotten up from my seat 3 times to either acknowledge someone or take a picture. Right? I locked eyes with President Trump. So I went over and shook Trump's hand. Tom Brady, I asked for a picture. And this dude Hasbulla, by popular demand, honestly, the people were asking me to get a picture with this kid. And I felt like I needed to make good on the imperative. So we got it done.
Oh, geez. Do you think that Do you think that like the UFC is more handcuffed now with putting on fights or having these outlier fights because of the corporate structure that's kind of come down since the UFC is sold? Or do you see any difference from your perspective on how things were pre-acquisition to post?
It's a good question. I don't have a great answer for you. I don't necessarily see any major transition. But it's kind of like my on to Cincinnati. It's like I'm so locked in. It's like I couldn't tell you the first thing about television ratings or how we're doing. I mean, certainly for me, I feel like more people are watching the UFC than were pre-COVID, and I think by a pretty significant margin domestically in the US. But in terms of matchmaking or appeasing certain people, I got too much shit on my plate to even give that a second of thought. And that's about as thoughtful an answer as I can give you.
You talked about commentating for other sports. Do you think there would ever be a time that you would ever stop commentating for the UFC, but maybe go do something more local or cover a Florida team just so you could have more time with the kids and family?
Yeah, I mean, I think about that every time I leave for a show. I battle my own demons, mental health and otherwise, and homesickness and being away from the kids, especially internationally. If I could never leave the US again, with respect to our international fans, I would never leave the United States of America again. I just wouldn't. I'm a homebody. But we'll see, right? You're only as good as your next contract. I got about 11 months left, so I'm in a contract year, and I guess we'll see what happens. The last time I called a major football game of any kind was 2015, and it was a tremendous pleasure to get the chance to do so. So I guess I hope there's some American football in my future at some point, but I have the job that I want, and sometimes with Dana White, you don't really know where you stand until your contract is up. So I'm hopeful that I'll be with the UFC indefinitely.
What's the biggest difference when you commentated for it was NFL, right? What game was that?
I did a college football game.
College football game, yes.
I still have not done an NFL football game. I'm hoping at some point I can get the chance, but it was Arizona at Washington, 49-3 at Husky Stadium there on the outskirts of Seattle, Washington, on Halloween night.
Yeah. What was the?
But that's the biggest difference, right?
Yeah.
The biggest difference is I'm in and out of there in 3.5, 4 hours, right? That's the biggest.
That was like a drive-through at McDonald's compared to what.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden it's halftime. They're like, you get a 12-minute break. You can go take a piss. It's like, oh, well, this is nice, Yes. When I do a UFC show, like I may not get a chance to use the restroom for 8 hours, right? Like you hear fighters talk about piss and blood and rust, and bro, I'm so dehydrated after these shows because I don't get a chance to take a piss. So I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but no, I think the biggest difference, honestly, for me was just how naturally American football came to me, right? Like the first MMA fight I called was with you, and it was 2009, I think. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, then maybe they got the wrong guy, but I sort of stay in my lane. You play to your skill set. You don't talk about omoplatas when you don't know what the hell they are. And I have sort of adopted that philosophy throughout my career as an MMA commentator, but I can't change the fact that I am not a lifelong martial artist, right? Like, yes, I have taken jujitsu classes since we have last called fights. I have taken boxing classes since we last called fights. That doesn't mean I wouldn't rather go play golf when I get a free minute, So for me, it was just, man, football is like all of the vernacular, all of the verbiage is just so natural to me because I grew up, obviously watching it and playing it. So, yeah.
Are there times you have an identical twin brother? I think most people know. Has your brother ever experienced people thinking that he was you and taking pictures? Or I think I would have some fun with that if you were my identical twin.
So he hasn't now cut his hair in almost 2 years, but in Newark, New Jersey in August of 2019, he was getting it pretty good. And, he gets a lot of people like looking at him, and I get that too, right? People who can't place who I am. And they're like, man, I think I know this guy from TV, but I don't have the stones to sort of ask him who he is. And, so yeah, but yeah, he should probably have more fun with it than he does. I'm an introvert though. It's interesting for me. Bruce Buffer's always telling me to walk tall with my head up, whereas I'm more inclined to walk through the host hotel with a hat down low and with my head down. But yeah, it's a great pleasure, the greatest blessing of my life, being an identical twin. And he's in the space now a little bit doing a podcast with Bilal Muhammad. So yeah, it's fun to have him, along for the ride to whatever degree.
And Kenny was your original broadcast partner for the UFC, right?
Yes.
So is that how you guys started building the relationship? And then how did you guys decide to hop into the Anik Florian podcast? And that's been going for about 6 years now, right? 2015.
Yeah. So you've always done your homework, my man. So we actually started on MMA Live together in April of 2008. So I remember the first MMA gym I walked into was Team Sidyod Tong in Somerville, Massachusetts. I think my head was as tall as the ceiling. I'm thinking, man, but in the back of the gym was Kenny Florian, who I met in 2008. Yeah, I called my first UFC fight with him January 2012, coming up on 10 years, which is crazy. And yeah, I mean, it took me like a year to convince him to do the podcast, which we launched in April of 2015, because as you well know, you got to commit to it. And when I initially asked him, I said, I need 60 minutes every Monday for the rest of your life. And he was like, what? So it took me a year to sort of convince him that, hey man, like we're doing this. And once we launch, we have to be consistent. Even if one episode isn't as good as last week's, right? Once you launch, you got to go live every Monday. So yeah, coming up on 7 years in April, which is absolutely nuts.
Wow. That's insane. You guys do those even if you're remote, because you're never in the same area. You guys are always doing this remotely.
Right. We've done them all over the world, Abu Dhabi and Brazil and Australia and wherever else. And Ken flows back on the road now with the PFL. So wherever he is, we have the equipment and all that stuff. And yeah, I mean, we take a couple weeks off a year, but 48, 49 shows every year for 7 years.
My goodness. How long did it take you guys to get traction with the podcast? Because I mean, like you talked about, you need every Monday for the rest of your life. People don't realize people try these podcasts and they go, or they're anything, they give it a go. And it's like, I tried. You got to just keep, I mean, Gary V, right? Like he talked about putting out thousands of pieces of content before anybody gave a shit. How long did it take you guys before you started feeling like, okay, maybe we can monetize this, or there's some other, value here that we're fulfilling?
Well, I think I would say it's still incomplete, right? I mean, I guess it took us 2 years to get out of the red and into the black as we sort of tried to build Anik Florian LLC. And, the merchandise sales are encouraging, but, it's not like we have this massive YouTube following for the podcast, right? Like, obviously our listeners and our viewers sort of complain and wonder why our subscribers aren't higher, but we have a very loyal following. Our numbers on the audio side have always been outstanding. And we feel like we're sort of the podcast of the MMA people. We feel like the fighters, the avid fans, the officials are listening to our show because it is a lot of meat and potatoes. I mean, not that we aren't trying to make you laugh a little bit here and there, but what you're getting, right? You're getting fight picks every single week. You're getting a fight recap every single week. And you're getting Ray Longo like off camera with his hair all out of whack, like being the New Yorker that I like to light up, but it takes a while, like when people say, dude, why don't you have hundreds of thousands of YouTube subscribers for your podcast? Like, I don't fucking know. I'm focused on the content, right? And that hasn't steered us wrong yet. I'm sure Ken Flo wishes I made him more money, but we're trying.
And you had the one more sleep, man. That's been, I see that shirt everywhere now.
Well, that's another thing. It sort of originated organically. People are still like, oh, you don't have a lot of catchphrases as a UFC announcer. And that is largely because I want every moment to live organically and historically by itself. If I had a catchphrase, and it may sound like I'm trotting out this answer, but if I had a catchphrase, then you wouldn't have moments like Poland, your guy got it done when Jan Blachowicz, breaks through. So the one more sleep thing sort of originated, on social media in like 2017, the night before I was doing a pay-per-view, and just kind of ran with it and started making t-shirts. We're in the process of trademarking it. And now you see it everywhere. Jimmy Fallon's got 5 more sleeps till Christmas, and all the pro sports leagues are trotting out, 2 more sleeps. So I don't know. I don't plan to have a lot of lawsuits on my hands. I'm just happy that the fans have kind of gotten behind it a little bit.
And just one more question before I let you go, because I know you actually have work to get done, man, outside of just shooting the shit with me here. So, with the growth of MMA, like PFL, Bellator, all these other organizations, and all the subsidiaries, smaller organizations, there's a lot of people that are, either in college or they're working on getting their MMA grit together so they can be the next Jon Anik. Because at some point, Jon Anik's going to want to retire and spend time with his family. There's going to be a spot there for the next person. What are some advice tidbits that you'd give someone who's looking to get into the broadcasting space?
Well, there's so much young talent out there. It really is amazing, right? When you think about all the skills that a lot of folks born in the 1990s have that maybe I didn't have as somebody who was born in the 1970s, right? In terms of social media, it's taken me a while to learn that language. So ultimately, you have to find a way to be ready when the opportunity presents itself, because I was probably sitting in an apartment in Watertown, Massachusetts, smoking a bowl when ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut called and said, hey, we need you to come down and do an on-air audition. And I couldn't get a sniff in Montana. I got a call from Bristol, Connecticut. So thankfully, when the audition arrived, I had sobered up and I was ready to go. But you got to find a way to get repetition so that when the opportunity comes, however big or small, you're ready. So you got to push out content, even if your mom's the only one listening. And that means weekly, that means daily, whatever it is. If you want to be in the podcast space, you need to start doing a podcast every week, whether people are listening or not. And if you want to call fights, there are ways to practice those skills, even though it's not ideal to mute the television and do it that way. There are ways to practice those skills. There are a lot of local shows, MMA shows that don't even have commentary. If you can find a connection with a promoter, bring your own equipment, maybe there's a way to get a play-by-play repetition. So try to find a way to get reps so that when your opportunities come, you'll be ready, because I don't know, man, I sent out 300 demos, 300, I got 2 bites, if I didn't get those 2 bites, who knows what I'd be doing. So try to be ready, because you never know when it's coming.
Got to make your own way, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, John. I know you're right up the street from me in Boca. Whenever you get more than 20 minutes, if you ever get 20 minutes, let's grab a beer or a coffee or something of that nature, man.
I would love to, man. Stay handsome. It's always good to see you. Thank
yes,
you for having
start
me on,
aging, or else if you don't start aging, bro, I'm gonna start calling shenanigans. I'm gonna start doing speculative on your Botox or something. I'm like,
I shave my head because I have a white wiffle. All my facial hair is basically white, and I wear a hat. So
you're just always in the shadow. That's why.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on. We got to have you on our show at some point soon, and wish you all the best, buddy. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it, John. Take it easy.
Thank you, buddy.